A warm greeting. Hello, friends. Welcome to Investment Immigration Conversations. I'm Carolyn Lee, your host, principal and founder of Carolyn Lee PLLC, a U.S. investment immigration law firm dedicated to helping clients build their futures with our favorite investment immigration. And boy, am I thrilled and a little nervous to have our dear, dear friend, Suzanne Lazicki, and unassuming luminary in our industry. Thank you truly, Suzanne, for shining the way and helping us understand and all the number crunching you do. My goodness, your number two yellow pencil must be worn to the nub and for everyone in the EB-5 ecosystem, from projects to investors, past, present, future, a humble thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you from my heart.
Well, thank you for taking these issues to heart. I think that both of us maybe are motivated by having been in EB-5 as long as we have, and seeing how the situation unfolded for the China backlog and investors that were our clients in 2015, 2016, who didn't really realize what they were getting into. And could we have known more at that time? And I'm wanting now to try to, I appreciate everyone who's working to shine as much light as possible now so that people are as informed as possible about prospects ahead.
I know. I'm so glad you brought that up, Suzanne, because we've never talked about it in these terms before, but I think both you and I are like, never again. That's not ever going to happen again, that we have that situation where people were, operating in the dark. And we want to share as much light as we possibly can, all the light that we know. And so that's why I'm so, thrilled and honored that you're a friend and, that you do all this work, because truly it is shedding so much light. And I can report that from having returned from a 2-week trip to China, India, you're next, is folks were asking such good questions. I really felt like we were doing such a good job, so much better than ever before, of getting the information out there and in an accessible way, because people are getting the information, absorbing it, analyzing it, and asking great questions. So it's like we're at a level playing field, more or less, in terms of the information that we have. And so that's what this is about today, is continuing that work of trying to understand this data and sharing what we know. And so we're, of course, going to start with the AIIA FOIA data share. Big shout out to AIIA and to the Galati law firm for their work in getting this information through FOIA litigation and sharing it with the public. Thank you. Great work.
Yeah, I think we can't praise this enough, because it is, especially right now, very difficult to get any information from USCIS. I almost had wondered if they had shut down their data reporting office because they were 4 months late on everything. And somehow Alexandra Georgia and Matt Galati managed to get them to provide us with really this trove, not only of receipt information, but also approval and denial information, which is so important as far as having something to work with and trying to understand where we are with the backlogs.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Alexandra. All right, so let's see if we can actually look at that data. Okay, so I am going to try to look at that data with folks and just sort of, start by looking at it. And it's right on the bottom of the homepage. So it is goaiia.org. And when you hit that homepage, you scroll down and you will be pointed to these articles. This is the one in the middle. The FOIA series updated I-526E inventory stats for January 2025. So this is data that brings us into up to and including January 2025, right, Suzanne?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the total number of I-526 and I-526E petitions filed between January 1, 2022. So this is 2 weeks post-RIA and January 31, 2025. So the start of this calendar year by TEA category and country of chargeability, latest statistics as per USCIS data queried February 2025 in response to AIIA FOIA request. And this really, I think, is the foundation of the analysis to come. And so let's just spend a moment on this. So we have the set aside categories here: rural high unemployment area, or HUA or HU, infrastructure, other. And what is other, we think? Like, is this like what is other?
That is a summary of in the columns in their report, they had a few other categories. For example, there were some people who are both rural and high unemployment. Some that were classified as unknown in the list. And because it wasn't a very large number of people for the summary
didn't
table,
worry
we
about
just
it.
stuck them in other.
Okay, but maybe is there any chance that there's double counting then? Like in other, putting folks in other that were already counted once in in another category? I mean, we're not going to worry about it too much, but anyway, so there's the other category here. And so here are the set aside categories, and the data is broken by country of chargeability. The two biggies, China, India, and rest of world, And here's the total. And so this means there were from April 1, 2022 to January 31, 2025. These are petitions, 2,684 petitions filed by China-born investors tagging rural, going into rural projects. And similar number, a little lower, mainland China-born investors investing in high unemployment, 2,380 petitions. 847 Indian petitions in rural projects, slightly higher for high unemployment, 883 Indian petitions in HUA. And then look at these numbers, rest of world rural, kind of almost like India for rural, and a lot more between India and China for HUA. Petitions. And I emphasize petitions because the next step in this analysis in terms of analyzing visa demand is going to be doing a little hop and projecting what this means, how this translates into the number of visas demanded. So this would have to include family members. And so that is going to involve some kind of multiplier. So now we're going to get to extrapolating from this raw data collected by AIIA. For that, I'm going to point y'all to.
By the way, Carolyn,
Yeah.
Before we leave that, I don't know if you want to comment to people on why we have those columns divided up into China, India, and rest of the world.
Please
because
do.
the raw
Please.
data, we actually got it for a bunch of countries. It wasn't only China and India. There are some other countries that have had quite high demand for the rural and high unemployment. But why is it that we just lump them all into the rest of the world when thinking about backlog?
Yeah, will you elucidate, illuminate, educate?
Well, with the caveat that I am not the lawyer here, Carolyn is the lawyer.
I not only
So
play
this
one
is
on TV, I actually am.
all right. Well, with me anyway, you know you're not getting legal advice, so I don't have to give the caveat. But
Yeah.
the reason why we look particularly at China and India is that of the countries that are subject to a cap on EB visas due to overall high demand just across employment-based and family-based visas, China and India are the ones that also have high demand in EB-5, and so they have the risk that they might get caught underneath the country cap, which can limit to as low as 7%. Whereas a country like South Korea, it's never come remotely close to using so many visas across the board that it gets subject to the country cap. So even if it has high demand specifically in EB-5, we can consider them just as part of the rest of the world, not one of the countries that's we need to think about as being subject to those cap limits.
And was that an inadvertent shout out to my birth country, Suzanne? You may not have known that is my birth country. But we digress. Let's go back to the numbers, kids. Okay. That is absolutely right. And we will see that's act, we're going to kind of talk about the interplay of the per country cap, that 7% in just a moment. I want to point folks to, if you haven't been here already, in which case, my goodness, pull your head out of the sand and get the straightaway to Suzanne's blog website. And this is already, this is the tab EB-5 timing. When you find Suzanne's blog website, I don't know if there's a term for that blog site. It's blog.lucidtext.com. She's going to have these tabs up on very top in the dark bar. If you go to EB-5 timing, this is sort of a landing page to where all of the magic has happened. And it's live too, right, Suzanne? You're like refining these numbers from time to time.
That is correct. These are my working Excel files that I link to here. And what I have going on, the first one is just a file where I have saved all the data that I've collected over the years. And so if you're looking for a particular data point, you may find it in that file together with the link of where this data point resides online.
Yes.
And so this is the first file is just sort of a reference. And then the second one is where I take the data that we have and try to organize it into just sort of understanding what it is telling us. And this I'm constantly revising this just because it's a really tough task to think of all of these little pieces of information that we have here and there. What's significant? How do these pieces go together? What are sort of the if-then scenarios of where we could go from here, considering these pieces of information that we have? And so this second file is the analysis where I specifically take the data and try to turn it into getting a handle on backlogs and wait times.
Yes. And so let's kind of start. So she's got these beautiful tabs, like super transparent, right? Like she'll point to the actual source data, but also do some analysis. So the first tab that we were just on is like table of contents. And then the second tab is the overview. And so let's kind of walk through this, Suzanne, shall we?
Sure.
Okay.
And I can't see what's on the screen, but I have it printed out in front of me. So I'm going to look at the large font on my paper.
Okay, can folks see what's on the screen though? Am I sharing? All right, let me see if I just want to make sure that I'm sharing.
You are sharing it.
Am
It's
I?
just
Okay, good. All right,
It's
just want to make
very
sure.
small font, but she
'Cause-
can talk about it.
Yes, this is like, if you can, this is all about sharing and looking at the numbers together. So here, I've enlarged the numbers somewhat as well. Okay, all right. So walk us through, Suzanne. We're the big sort of categories of analysis are, number one, estimated EB-5 backlog as of January 2025. Okay, and this includes unreserved. Number two is by rural, the weight analysis by rural. Number three is by high unemployment. And the fourth is by unreserved. All right, so let's start from the tippy top. Estimated EB-5 backlog as of January 2025. So somebody's coming into this and going, oh my gosh, this looks super and very important. I want to try to understand this. How should they orient themselves into understanding this presentation?
Well, I'll tell you what I was trying to accomplish with this table. I want to get sort of an overall picture of who is in line right now for an EB-5 visa and which line are they in, because you can think of it sort of as queues. There's a queue of people lined up for unreserved visas. There's a queue of people lined up for rural visas. And then because country of origin affects how visas can be issued, you can also think of queues by country. So there's all of the Chinese who are lined up for an unreserved visa can get one in first in, first out order. The Indians who are lined up for an unreserved visa. So I want to put all these people in the queue out there. And I also want to compare, okay, if I have a sense of how many people are in line, how many visas are they waiting for? So that's the second section there, is the base annual visas that are available at the visa window once they come up to it. And then the third subsection there is just divides the number of visa applicants in each category by the base number of visas that are available to them. And this is just a starting point, because in real life, you can flow between these categories. So for example, we know that for people who are rural investor or high unemployment investor, a rural investor can get a rural visa, but a rural investor also has opportunity to request a unreserved visa. So depending on which is going to be available first. So we know it's possible to go back and forth that way. And then as far as visas available for China and India, the high demand countries, I know that they're going to have access to at least 7%, which is the lowest that they can cap them at under the country cap. But I also know that they could have access to more than 7% if the rest of the world isn't taking all the visas and leaving visas on the table that can be allocated above the minimum. So I make this table to, first of all, just based on the minimum number of visas available, the maximum applicants in each category, where is the imbalance? And that bottom section shows me where the imbalances are. China, there are so many more China unreserved applicants than the minimum number of unreserved visas that could go to China. On the other hand, if I look down in unreserved to the rest of the world, the number of rest of the world applicants in line are only about enough to use about a year of visas. And so looking at that makes me think, even though there's such a big crunch in China unreserved, there's not such a crunch in rest of the world. So I can count on, okay, China maybe can be counting on unreserved visas in addition to its minimum, which is what we have seen all along. China has gotten thousands of visas every year above the 7% limit, just because the rest of the world has not had enough applicants to take the ones that are left. And if I'm looking at the high unemployment category, in that bottom section there, I see, wow, both China and India and rest of the world, all of those have so many more people in line than the base annual visas available. And so then I start to think about what's the possibility for lateral move, for example.
Which we'll get
those-
into.
Yeah,
Which we'll get into in the below charts. But let's just make sure that we really, really understand what's going on here. Because as you say, Suzanne, this is kind of like really, kind of like this is the universe that we're looking at. And as mentioned earlier, this already reflects some assumptions from the raw data, right?
oh,
Because,
yes, let me back up and say the
all right,
assumptions. That's
okay.
very important.
Hmm.
Number one, as far as the number of applicants in unreserved, this is my best estimate based on some pretty old data as of 2023 and early 2024, because the National Visa Office has not published their updated data. So in these numbers, the summary unreserved numbers, if you want to go over to the unreserved, no, don't do it. I'm just telling people at home.
Yeah,
they can
no,
see
I'm not
how
gonna
I
click on
calculated
anything
that
for you.
estimate, but this is my best estimate. I'm guessing it's on the high side. I think that when Department of State finally comes out with their updated data, we're going to realize that the numbers are a little lower
off.
than this.
Hey, Suzanne, the
Yeah.
latest numbers that I've looked at in this category were from May 2024, the IIUSA conference.
Yes.
Are these those numbers, or are they more recent?
The NBC uses May 2024.
Okay.
I also, so I took from three sources, NBC pending I-485 and then pending I-526. The pending I-526 were also an AIIA FOIA request. Also Galati Law got that, I think. That was as of July 2024.
Okay.
And then the adjustment of status data was about the same time. But the NBC is where I feel like there's really the question mark, because there are so many like 2014, 2015 priority dates still registered at NBC. So you wonder, you know, Visa Bulletin has been current for these people for a long time. Are they actually still planning to apply? And if they aren't still planning to apply, then these numbers are smaller. And
Right.
maybe the unreserved backlog is not as
Right.
bad.
So there's just the qualifier, right? You know, these aren't like precise to the digit. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So
Right. And then for rural and high unemployment, what I did is just take all those I-526 receipt numbers that we looked at and multiplied it by 2. And there are two big assumptions there. One big assumption is that basically everybody who filed I-526E since 2022 still doesn't have a visa as of the start of this year. And based on what I can gather of monthly visa issuance, that's fairly close to accurate. I think there's maybe been about 300 rural and maybe about 600 high unemployment issued through the beginning of this year. But basically, since there were no visas issued in 2022 or 2023 and just a few in 2024, we still do mostly have most people in line. And
so that's a big assumption too.
yeah, that is a big assumption, because we do get all data on a delay. So who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. And so
We'll
just
see.
to kind of, you know, kind of break it down a little bit further for folks. So like, let's look at this. So the AIIA data, rural, right? So for China, it was 2684. So if we go to Suzanne's, that's China rural times 2.
Yeah.
For India, it was 847 for rural. You go to Suzanne's, that's that number times 2 right there.
Yeah. And this is a summary tab right here. There are other tabs in the model where I actually break down all the steps in that calculation.
Yeah.
I've been using 2 for my estimates, just sort of as a rough estimate. In real life, and that's assuming, well, Yeah, I think
Yeah,
with the
right,
average family size and average denial rate, and
right.
I think it ends up somewhere around 2 historically. And
I,
where it will go in the future, we don't know because it depends on how big families are and uh, how much
I know.
attrition and failure rate there
Right.
is with
Like my
projects.
numbers are a little bit bigger because I tend to use 2.2. And then for rest of world, I go with 3. But that's an interpretive, that's an assumption that is going to affect the numbers, so that's something that we'll point out right there. Suzanne
Absolutely.
is using
And
2.
also this is a responsive model. So if someone has the Excel downloaded at home, they can go into
You can
the
play.
rural tab and high employment tab and just in one place change the multiplier assumption and we'll recalculate everything.
Love it.
And
Love
that's
it.
sort of interesting too, because one of the ideas that people have been pushing for visa relief is what if we weren't counting derivatives? What if we were
Right.
only counting investors? So you can go in and just enter a 1 in that cell and see how much would this outlook change if we just had to give
Oh,
one
maybe if
visa
we
to
had
each
time, we'll do
investor.
that. Suzanne, if we have time, let's totally do that because there's good statutory basis for adopting that interpretation with EB-5 only. But let's focus. Okay, so the second, base annual visas. So this is just, our 10,000 limit annual, not this year. This year we have a lot more because of the carryovers, but this is in a normal year, we have the 6,800 in the unreserved. We have the 2,000 in rural, 1,000 in high unemployment, 200 in infrastructure for a total of approximately 10,000. This row right here is that per country cap that Suzanne mentioned earlier, and it's 7%. So 7% of that unreserved is going to be 476. 7% of the rural 2000 is going to be 140. 7% of the 1000 is, of course, 70. 7% of the infrastructure 200 is 14. 7% of the overall annual limit is 700. And then we have the 86% rest of world, which is the lion's share, the difference down here. Anything you want to say about that, Suzanne?
Sure. One thing is that I did finally decide to just put in the base availability instead of trying to count carryovers. And the reason I did that is I think basically what happens for rural and high unemployment is that each of them get an extra year of visa availability thanks to carryovers. But they've been so slow in issuing visas that like this year, even though there are 4,000 rural visas available, I'll be surprised if they get anywhere near issuing even 2,000 visas this year. So I'm hoping that in the end, it will average out that starting from 2025, we have an average 2,000 rural visas issued a year. And I think that average can maybe be accomplished by, even though this looks like a low visa issuance year, there'll be carryovers in the rural category next year, and maybe they'll actually issue the carryovers next year. So it'll all even out. But
And
go ahead.
yeah, no, please go ahead, finish.
But if this is a good visa year, then the rural and high unemployment wait times could be like a year less each, just because there will be effectively an extra year's worth of visa availability thanks to the carryover visas if they can all actually be issued.
And just a plug for IIUSA litigation to keep the numbers ultimately resting in unreserved after having been carried over into the same reserved category for 1 year. Any unused visas there go to unreserved. And then from unreserved, there we want those numbers to stay forever until depleted by the pre-RIA demand. We do not want them to flow up under the normal operation of the INA to EB-1. We love EB-1, we love you, but we believe that these numbers are specially reserved and the operation is governed by the RIA, which says that these numbers go in unreserved. and we argue stay in unreserved.
And I hope that is successful, because to not lose any visas out of unreserved definitely is very important. And ultimately, it will benefit rural and high unemployment investors as
100%.
well, because they will, as illustrated in this table, if every high unemployment investor could only get a high unemployment visa, they'd be waiting forever. So it's very nice that there's that safety valve, that there is room in the unreserved category, starting with the rest of the world, to move over. But eventually even China and India could have shorter wait times there.
Yes, it's best for the entire ecosystem. All right, so that's our baseline right there. And so
before we move on from that,
yeah,
if you wouldn't mind, the most common thing that I see people concluding, that I think is an erroneous conclusion, is that they only look at those gray shaded lines. And like for rural, they think, okay, if there are 8,000 people in line, 2,000 visas a year,
right,
8 divided by 2, that means a 4-year wait time.
right,
And
right
the
there.
reason why that doesn't work is because of the country caps. And what the country caps do is they effectively make the wait time include people who are going to apply in the future. So if I'm an investor from China or India, I don't only need to worry about everyone who has priority dates before me, because the country caps are an exception to first in, first out order. I also have to worry about who's going to come in after me but might be able to get a visa before me. So if I'm a Chinese investor with a January 2025 priority date, I'm not only going to be waiting for all these other data points here to get through the system, I also am going to be waiting for more rest of the world investors who are going to come in and invest in later 2025, maybe in 2026, for as long as it takes me to get a visa. I could be waiting for them. And we see that with Chinese now, who have 2017 priority dates, and they're having to wait to get a visa after rest of the world investors who have 2021, 2022 priority dates.
That's a really, really good explanation, Suzanne. Because rest of world is current, and so that demand has to be satisfied regardless of the priority date, regardless of when they applied. They can have a 2023, 2024 priority date. And if they're qualified, they're documentarily qualified, ready for visa issuance, those visas will be issued ahead of somebody with a 2014 priority date in that example. So that is why we can't go with this calculation.
And that's also why this bottom line there of rest of the world and how their number of people in line compare with the number of visas available is really the key row to look at, I think. Because if I'm from China or India, I want to know how much cushion is there from visas that the rest of the world is not going to use. So
Right.
I'm looking at, for example, in rural, I can see that at least as of January, the all-time rural rest of world investments were still not enough to use a full year of rural visas. And so that shows me that in rural, even if all the rural investors stay in the rural line, there's going to be a cushion for China and India, at least a little bit of cushion. And also the fact that
But not much. I
not
mean, just a
much,
little
no.
bit.
Yeah. And when I did my long-term projections for rural, rather than just looking at how many people came in at all time, I look specifically at the rural investors in calendar year 2024.
Right, because this is since RIA. This
Right,
is April
exactly.
2022 to January 2025. So if
Right.
we just did an annual of rest of world, where would that take us?
Um,
We have that, right?
yeah,
Maybe now is the time
let's
to
see.
go here.
It's a 0.7. It's in calendar year. It's not on this page,
Okay,
but in
it's 0.7.
2024, the level of rural investors from rest of the world were enough to take 70%
Almost
of the
all.
total rural
How
allocation.
about high unemployment?
Well, high unemployment,
Annually.
there are a huge number of rest of the world investors
To this
compared with,
point, but annually, like taking
oh,
2024.
on an annual basis. Let me see. Yeah, I actually did not do that calculation in 2024, but
That's
there,
okay, but it's big.
yeah,
It's big, yeah. Well, the supply is so small. It's tiny.
right.
The
And
rest of
so in
world
high
supply.
unemployment, looking at just how for every country there are the applicants are exceeding what can get visas in a year. This makes me think, especially in high unemployment, people are going to want to be thinking about how do I optimize my visa choice?
Right.
And those rest of the world investors who are in high employment thinking,
Yep.
I don't want to wait for 4 years to get a visa when
Yep.
over there in unreserved, their backlog looks like it get cleared out in a year. I'm going to
Right.
jump over and get an
Yep.
unreserved visa.
Yep.
And another thing that's very important is that this number, these numbers right here, I did try to calculate a snapshot as of January 2025, because that's when we had the data from AIIA for the number of receipts up to 2025. And then I tried to calculate forward my old 23, 24 unreserved data to that point so that we could get a picture of, as of one point in time, how many people are in line. But as a result, this calculation is very specific to that point in time. So if someone has a 2023 priority date in rural, you have a different picture here because there were fewer people, rural investors in line in 2023. You have fewer people to wait for than someone who's looking at this picture right here. And at the same time, if someone isn't going to invest until June 2025, 6 months or 5 months have passed since
Right.
this picture. And so you
Right.
can assume that there are more
There's
people
more.
in line. Yeah.
And I think this is the perfect time to just say, with Suzanne's protest, Suzanne does offer an analysis of a backlog, the visa backlog or the wait time for clients. She, obviously has limited supply of her own hours, but that might be available for you if you're very lucky. Moving on to, all right, so now let's look at rural. Tell us what this is showing us.
And if you actually want to skip over to the rural tab, this is a summary of.
Yes, no, let's stay with the
Okay.
summary because this is, we have to kind of keep it as basic as we can because I want to make sure I understand how to read this.
Okay, so what I did here, it's an expanded version of what's above. First of all, you look at the demand, then you look at the supply of visas, and then think about what the wait time options could be. So what's in the blue font there, that's the fact. Those are the number
These are
of
the AIIA numbers.
I-526T that have been filed. Yeah. The next column over is the estimate, which is how many visa applicants are going to result. And you can see I just multiplied everything by two.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next column is the base annual supply. That's
7%.
At least this many visas are going to be available. Maybe it's going to be more than that. And then I think through, given these facts, here are how many people in line, here's how many visas available. How could this possibly turn out as far as wait times? And there are 4 major scenarios that I modeled. The first one was just, what if that only these base visas are available and every one of those people in line has to just get the minimum number of visas that could be available to them.
Which this scenario, just for clarity, means rest of world is all full.
That this means that every rural investor takes a rural visa, and then the number of rural visas available to them is just the minimum it could possibly be.
Right.
And so that's
and the rest
right
of the
here.
world is full. The rest of the world is all being used by rest of world. And so no fall across to the high demand countries. That's the assumption, which has never been, but yes.
Yeah, for scenario one, I don't expect this to happen because number one, the number of rural investors are not yet at the level where they could consistently take all the rural visas available to them. So that's one point.
Right.
And then the fact that rural investors have the option to switch lanes if the unreserved
Number
category is
two.
more
Yeah.
advantageous,
Yeah.
that makes me think, is someone from China actually going to be waiting 38 years for a rural visa? No, they are not. Because
God, I
the
hope not.
if for one thing, there is a chance they'll get allocated visas above the minimum, given that rest of the world probably won't take the minimum. The other factor is that an unreserved visa is going to be available earlier than 38 years. So
Right.
the next so the first column is the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
The second column is the very best case scenario for China and
Mhm.
India, which is what if all the rest of the world demand left the rural category?
Right.
All rural investors said, we're not going to bother taking a rural visa. We're going to request an unreserved visa.
Right. All rural rest of world.
Yeah. So the effect of that would be that China and India just get to share what's there and
Right.
first in, first out
The
without respect to
2000s.
country caps. So in that
Yeah.
case, you would just be looking at the bottom line total and going, okay, 8,000 people in line,
Right.
2,000 people in here were
Right.
waiting 4 years for the last
Yeah.
person in line to get through.
Exactly.
So that would be, and this also, I think this maybe is unlikely to be realized just because it's optional for rest of the world investors to tell the National Visa Center, hey, I've decided I want an unreserved visa, or answer the RFE on their I-485 to say, I've decided I'm going to request an unreserved visa. They don't have to do it. And initially, they may not be feel a personal motivation to do that.
I know.
I don't know if you have a
Let's talk about
comment on
that.
the likelihood of the
I
scenario.
have that. I mean, that's one of the things that that clouds the crystal ball is human behavior, and how they will be advised and what they choose to do, and also the mechanics of NVC. We had, as I shared with you, Suzanne, and others, early post RIA, we tried to choose for our rest of world investor clients the unreserved category. Tried and tried and tried, and it just mechanically wasn't working. And so we went to rural or whatever. And so, I think that's also going to factor into the ultimate demand, is that the mechanics of, how easy it is to switch lanes. And I hope it'll be easy. Now, question, what if somebody asks, well, Suzanne, why is it 4 years for both China and India when the pipeline demand is so different?
In this case, if rest of the world is not in the picture and the people in line are just sharing the visas, then it's no longer an issue of who's Chinese and who's Indian. It's just going in, first in, first out
First
order.
out by priority date.
Yeah, and so this is just an estimate for the last person with the January 31st priority date. When would they be getting the visa?
Fantastic. All right.
And another thing that would make this scenario more likely is if, let's say, grandfathering expires in September 2026. What if people only invested up till then, and then EB-5 just suddenly became not popular? People were afraid of legislative change or disincentivized by something else. And so we were only dealing with the old priority dates already in line. We didn't need to account for pressure of rest of the world applicants continuing to come in. Then that would give more space for old applicants from China and India to be able to share all the visas that are there going forward, instead of having to account for more and more rest of the world investors coming in and potentially crowding them out.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right. Scenario 3.
Scenario 3 is what I calculated, just increasing the base annual visa, or assuming that the level of rural investment from rest of the world in 2024 is characteristic, and that there'd be about 30% of visas that are available on priority basis to rest of the world that could actually go to China and India because the rest of the world's not taking
30%.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the scenario that would come if rural investors all stay in the rural line, but rest of the world demand stays as low as it's been. And
Yeah.
there would
It's
still
not
be
bad.
interest for
This
China
is
and
not
India.
bad. All right. And then scenario 4.
And then scenario 4 is just what if all these rural investors just waited for the next available unreserved visa?
Yep.
And so this is my current estimate for at what point would the unreserved backlog be clear, and then the time for all of these other applicants that we've estimated to get unreserved visas after the unreserved
So
backlog
let's
is clear.
understand that. So let's say there's a 10-year backlog currently. And then so where does the additional 2, how do you calculate that?
The additional 2 I'm getting by looking at the number of rural and high unemployment investors and thinking, how long would it take them all to get unreserved visas after the unreserved backlog clears? So that's what I came up with the estimate, if it would take about 2 years for those people. And this last calculation is, I think, the one that's most important, and it's also the most that there's most scope for this one to be wrong. I think it's most important because I do think that the unreserved alternative is, for anyone who's considering EB-5 investment now, this is really an important option to have in mind, because the worst case scenario for both rural and high unemployment is bad. So if you will, the worst case scenario won't necessarily be realized, but you definitely want to know that you've got a scenario you can fall back on other than that worst case scenario. And unreserved is definitely a fallback.
Agreed.
And I would say that the estimates I put in there, in my opinion, these are on the pessimistic side, because they're based on somewhat old data points that I think might be on the high side. And also, I didn't really, I didn't put in much of an attrition estimate in there. I didn't assume that, you know, maybe 10% of people every year who've been waiting at NBC are going to drop out, which is, yeah.
Used to, so.
Actually, the unreserved, I didn't use any multiplier in this except on I-526.
Right, no, because we have actual
most of this
numbers.
data comes out of the National Visa Center and I-485. But I'm not 100% confident in the NBC numbers that I have. I'm going to be very interested to see what they come out with in 2024, because I think they're recounting. I think they're being forced by legislation to recount and see.
Suzanne,
maybe in litigation.
Yes, agreed. Suzanne's talking about the unreserved pre-RIA backlog numbers, because that's like a number that exists somewhere, you know, we know. So let's just understand this, because I agree with you. This is what I've been kind of falling back to. And I'm like, initially having done math somewhere around here and completely panicking. And so thankfully, I think we're kind of in here, but can you do this for us again? So how are we, let's say for India, we have a 5-year wait to clear through the unreserved pre-RIA backlog. From thence, how do you get 7? We have 1694 demand in rural and 1766 for high unemployment. So together we have about 3,300. How do you get the additional 2 years?
I have this whole calculation spelled out on the detail tabs in the model, the rural and high unemployment. Maybe rather than going over there and making people squint at Excel, though, what I do is just, I take the estimated time to clear the pre-RIA backlog, which
Right,
I'm currently estimating at 10 years for China and 5 years for India.
right.
And then I take the rural and high unemployment queues, the number of applicants that I'm estimated in line right now,
Mhm.
estimate how many rural or high unemployment visas are they going to get during those 5 years or 10 years while they're waiting for the backlog to clear, come up with the estimate of the size of that backlog at the time that the unreserved backlog clears, and then further divide that by the number of visas that I estimate will be available going
I
forward.
see.
Yeah, and this gets complicated because in the past, the in the unreserved category, basically any visa that was not used by rest of the world, it went to China because China had the oldest priority dates
Right.
in unreserved. Now, when we're looking at rural and high unemployment, demand from China and India has been coming in concurrently. And so when we get to the point of being able to issue unreserved visas to post-RIA investors from China and
It's
India,
gonna be
they're going to be
mixed.
sharing the,
Yeah.
and so I did a little estimate on there just based on the proportions of China and India, how many
Mm-hmm.
visas they would
Gotcha.
each get. The big X factor, as always, is rest of the world. How many visas is rest of the world going to take? And
Well,
my estimate for the time to clear the China backlog used to be much less because I was thinking that they just need to wait till the pre-RIA rest of world investors get through the
No,
system,
but
and then
they're
China
like,
will get all the unreserved visas. But
yeah,
now that I'm assuming probably post-RIA rest of
especially
world investors are going
AQA.
to make the move there, I'm guessing that rest of the world is consistently going to be able to take at least 3,000, 3,500 visas. And if that's the case, that limits what's left to China and India and makes
So
their,
you can see how dynamic this analysis is, these projections. It's like these are levers, and so if fewer from rest of world and set asides go into unreserved, there will be more numbers flowing across to China and India, thereby reducing the wait time for the pre-RIA investors. So this is all very modular and there are lots of levers here. Coming back to this scenario 4, estimated wait for unreserved visa, is it correct to say that basically you're estimating 4 additional years shared between China and India after the backlog clears in unreserved? Because you have 10 plus 2 and you have 5 plus 2 here.
um,
And they're
I,
zhuzhed together, China and India. That's okay. It's
see,
roughly 4 years, and that's kind of what it looks like. It's, if we calculate 10 years to clear the backlog, then it's 2 additional years for the set aside demand to get into the unreserved, and so that's that, which is not horrible. And then same thing for India. It's 5 years to clear the pre-RIA backlog plus 2 years as of January. Again, that number is growing because now it's end of May, and so there will be more. But okay, this is
yeah.
amazing. Um, is it?
Even though the Excel is it is sort of overwhelming, but I do encourage people, if you're interested in this, download it and then just try changing assumptions yourself. Because I did try to set it up so that it was responsive. So if
Yeah.
you're thinking, wait a minute, I think that there should be I think that there's going to be a higher denial rate. I want to model that. Just go and stick it in and see what happens. Or I'm not interested in January 2025. I applied in January 2024. I want to see what the backlog was up till my date. Enter January 2024 and you will bring up the numbers.
Can I just encourage everybody? I mean, this is under protest from Suzanne. Um, please support Suzanne's work. Please, please, please. You go right here. Suzanne doesn't want me to do this, but you can go from her main page, which is blog.lucidtext.com, And if you go to the right, you can show your support for her amazing work that she has done. I just, I don't even know how to describe where this is coming from, but it's someplace really, really good. And, thank you. We have a couple of minutes for questions, so let me see if I can manage to not or stop share. Here we are. Okay, we actually have a few questions, like more than a few, but we'll just take a couple. Uh, Yes, if you have specific questions, do down about your particular priority date. Get in there, do the, like play around with with the interactive spreadsheet. And I think you will find a treasure trove of specific information about your case.
Uh, one question to address is that all of the timing things that I talk about, this
Yeah,
is the estimated time from when someone files I-526E to when a visa number would be available. So this is not related to EAD or advanced parole timing.
right.
What time someone can get their EAD, there's no visa limit on that. So that's just however long the processing takes. And the other thing to remember is that as far as the real life time to get a visa number, that's as long as it takes for visa number to be available, or as long as processing takes, whichever is longer. And sometimes the slow processing times, you can depend on it being longer.
Indeed. Is there any
Let's
other
see.
question you want to take from the questions queue, Suzanne? Maybe one or two more, and then we'll wrap it up.
Uh, sure. The Excel file that Carolyn was talking about, that is linked publicly on my blog, blog.lucidtext. There you can, looking at the specific data sheets, you can check position in the queue for my analysis is focused right now on 2022 to 2024 priority dates, because that's what we have the new data for. But if you're China from a 2016 date, you can actually go in that file and unhide a sheet that I have in there called China pre-RIA, which I hid because the data in it is kind of old. But that's my best information and best guess as far as when an August 2026 state would have a visa available.
Well, we are
And
passing our, oh, yes.
Carolyn, could you just say something about your good news about possibilities on visa relief? Or I
Oh
think
my
you mentioned
gosh,
that.
good news. I wish I had good news. I don't have good news yet, but we're all keeping fingers crossed for successful advocacy to expand visa capacity in EB-5. There was a recent piece written by Stephen Moore that's been circulating in the industry, and it's basically a revival of what we know, which is I don't think the article goes into legislative history, but the article revives the concept of not counting derivatives in EB-5, but only the investors, counting the investors, which has legislative history. When Congress created the EB-5 category in 1990, there's record to support this. The drafters contemplated 10,000 investors per year, not 3,000 investors and their dependents, 10,000 investors. And this interpretation is unique to EB-5. It doesn't apply to the other categories. And so it would not open the floodgates to tripling or quadrupling all of employment-based annual visas that are available. So this is legislative history unique to EB-5. And it is also a matter of interpretation, the State Department giving effect to the INA and the allocation of the annual limits every year. And so by executive action, the interpretation can be changed. Or perhaps by rulemaking, if there is the sense that it's a legislative rule that requires some notice and common rulemaking before a different interpretation is adopted. So these are, if these actions are taken, it could greatly expand the number of visas available in the EB-5 category, which would be a tremendous relief. And that feels like the right word, relief. And of course, we have a shot at changing things from a legislative standpoint because we need reauthorization to continue the EB-5 Regional Center program after September 30, 2027, when the RIA sunsets. So we'll have a couple of bites at the apple, but the former is the path of the easiest path, the most elegant in a way, because it's true to legislative intent behind the EB-5 program. And so I'm hopeful. And indeed, this is something that can unify us all.
Yes, definitely we need more visas. And until then, to answer to the final question, does it mean that urban or rural doesn't matter since unreserved will be freed after 7 years for Indians? I would say if you decide that the most likely case scenario is that you're going to have to wait for an unreserved visa, then the rural versus urban choice would not make a difference from the visa availability perspective. To the extent that the timing of I-526 approval makes a difference to you, the AIIA data also shows that they are approving and processing a lot more rural than high unemployment so far and with more recent priority dates. So there does appear to be a definite rural advantage for I-526 approval, not necessarily for visa availability, although that kind of depends on what happens with rest of the world rural demand going forward.
All right. Well, we're well past the top of the hour. So Suzanne, thank you again for all you do and for being our very, very special guest today. And thank you to everybody. And I hope this was informative. It certainly was for me. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye. Bye, Suzanne. Talk to you soon.